my name is Atiyyah. I'm from Joburg, from the Far East, from a little small town called Benoni. I work in Cape Town as a freelance journalist in like arts and music and culture for like the last 12 years. So when I moved here to work at the Argus, the Cape Argus, which is a national newspaper in like arts and like music writing. And I just never left. Even after I stopped working there, something about Cape Town and the atmosphere and the vibe and the place just kind of kept me here, even when I didn't have work or whatever, you know. So I also co-run a collective called Future Nostalgia, which used to, or currently is on pause, but like used to host regular events for music listening with like celebrating records and using vinyl as a medium, but really just as a way for people to gather and explore like different sounds, just a bit left field or from the radio, you know. And and also just like explore the community of music a little bit more from like a perspective of digging and collecting music. A little bit off from the mainstream, let's say, in that sense, in what is considered like top 40 hit music nowadays. So what I mean is like looking back into our own history. So say like a lot of South African music that came before our time, or a lot of jazz that maybe we only learning about now because we didn't grow up with it, or that the radios are not playing. So I'm really talking about the shift from this Americanized culture that has happened in South Africa, or this westernized culture that we have, that we are products of. So now with the internet and now with collecting records, you kind of like, you don't find always what you want, but you find things and then you like, oh wow, I didn't know about this. And the point is that you learn from others, because my record collection and your record collection will never be the same. So you know, I think that has been a process of learning about music. What I'm trying to say is like, when I started working as a music journalist, I thought, you know, I was young and I thought I knew something about music in South Africa. And the minute I started collecting records, which was years later, I realized I hadn't even like scratched the surface. You know, so I was thrust into the position of arts journalist or arts writer. Later I studied this stuff. I went overseas to study. But you learn by listening. You know, that's really how you learn. And so listening, it always comes back to listening, and also like being open-minded about sounds and doing your research and your homework. Here's the thing about generations, is that I grew up in the time of tapes and the philosophy of cassettes, which is like recording yourself, recording off the radio, this idea of piracy, I guess, that comes very naturally when you're working with tapes and mixtapes and then into CDs. So we never really got to explore records. And by the time that, you know, that has a resurgence, there's really like, okay, like a discovery of like, what was it about the appeal of this? But it wasn't really that. I've been collecting for years because I am a natural nostalgist. The thing with records was that I think a lot of people, but for me especially, I started collecting out of interest from like flea markets and stuff. Because the medium was so appealing to me as this old object. So I've started collecting before I had a record player. And when I worked at the Argus, which is funny because you just build up this collection and you can't really listen to the music, but most of the time I think it's stuff you know or have an interest in. So like it was anything from Sound of Music to like Depeche Mode, you know, like things that are easy to find. And when I was at the Argus in 2008, which is when I started, I was like with my first real salary as a person in the world. Like I had finished studying and I was like, with my first salary, which wasn't a big amount, I'm gonna like spoil myself with a turntable or record player. And Mabu at the time, Mabu, I just parked outside Mabu one day and found it in 2008. That's when I like arrived here. Mabu had this like, it was like a record player built in with cassettes, deck. It was like a whole sound system thing going for like 800 bucks. And I was like, this is my present to myself as somebody for the first time working a job, you know, like let's and I absolutely fell in love with it, like the idea of having it in my room, It was like really a wooden beaten up one. It was nothing fancy. And it was just the idea of listening and exploring music, and then the liner notes, and then the artwork. And that was like, let's say 2008, but I've been collecting for much longer before that, but the first player, okay?
Yeah.
And then I left Cape Town, and when I returned, like at the start like of this, I would really pinpoint it to 2013 when the release of Daft Punk's album, I forget which one, but the one that came out around 2012, 2013. The promo for that showed the two of them going, like walking down a pathway to a turntable and putting on their album, and that was like the promo material. And this was at a time when you couldn't find like albums in like mainstream stores like Musica. And I remember in December 2013, Musica started restocking vinyl for the first time since they had taken them off their shelves, you know. So this resurgence was very noticeable because it was happening globally, where it was coming back. In some places it never left. For a lot of people, records had always been around. But I think in South Africa, and like once the CDs and stuff started coming in, like people would speak to me about having junk piles full of records that people just throwing away their collections also. Well, selling them or throwing them away, you know. So a lot of places that step never happened, but here it did. So it definitely felt like a resurgence. And also because I wrote about it at the time, 2013, 2014, I did a few articles that mapped it out a bit. And shops were opening all over Cape Town, but also things like Look and Listen, which were big mega stores for like a long time, were shutting down, you know, because CD sales were just not cutting it anymore. I have spent a large amount of time digging, but also money, because these things have become incredibly expensive now. Looking for South African, not only jazz, but also traditional music, and it seems to be some of the hardest, along with African music, for me it seems to be some of the hardest music to find. And, you know, we can get into it later, but what's sad is that globally it's so easy to find. But yeah, Yuma Sakela's Colonial Man is an album I'm just digging right now. So I'm just gonna say, and that for me gave me like this moment of like, what, like, wow, like how is this overlooked in a sense? Or how did I grow up not knowing about this? How come no one talked to me about this album, you know? So I can say now what's blowing my mind. Yeah, and I think not to stray away too much, but I've been realizing this whole thing about how colonized we are and how we don't even know it, and how we still continue to be, and how the education system perpetuates it. So it's not, while you can't be blamed, at the same time you have to like really put in a lot of your own work to work yourself out of that. So Milton Market again, shout out. I was there 2 weeks ago and I found this massive book that you could like kill somebody with, called The Scramble for Africa by Thomas Pickenham. And it was like going for $50. And I was like, when you buy a piece of fiction written from a white perspective, I mean non-fiction, sorry, you don't really know if this is like completely false. You have to take it with a pinch of salt, but you don't know. I knew about the book, but I didn't know that much. But anyways, I bought it, and it's beautiful because it's filled with all kinds of anecdotes about David Livingstone and King Leopold and all these maps. And I was like, wow, man. So now I have to use this as a starting point to start learning about stuff. So the first map in there is this 1876 map of Africa before the colonial powers came through, and also showing the ownership by indigenous land ownership. So it maps out a picture of Africa that we don't even think about, or I don't think even grown adults who are in their 60s and 70s, I don't think the thought comes across your mind unless you really have to, because this is how the system works so well in schools. So then I was like, and then I was just thinking of a song to go with a map, you know. I was like that, or, you know, I was just thinking of a song, and I was like, oh, Colonial Man by Yuma Sakela. And then I was like, what do the lyrics say? I know I want to check out the lyrics. And then I Googled it and I couldn't find it. And then I went to the record and I started really reading all the lyrics on the back of that album. And I was like, man, this was 1876 is the map, and 1976 is the record cover. And it's so funny to like map exactly 100 years that they really were artists, you know, for as much as Yuma Sakela is considered very popular artist, there were artists in South Africa or in the continent who were like, who were paying attention to this stuff and trying to provide an alternative type of history. Because clearly Bantu education was not providing it, and nor is the current system now providing it. We learn more about the West than we do about our own history, you know? So we don't even know that there's all these monuments in the whole continent of David Livingstone, seen as a hero, like hospitals, schools, churches, because he was a missionary. And I'm like 34 and I'm learning about this stuff now, which isn't anything to be ashamed about, because I think that's something we always feel like we should be more intellectual than we are, or we should know this stuff already, but the information is not there. And so in this time of lockdown and being trapped in your house and kind of using social media as a way to spread that knowledge, because it should be free and it should be everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, and especially if you like really feel seriously about it. So it's funny to come to it through music, because there's a track there about Vasco da Gama, and there's a track about Cecil John Rhodes, which was also timely because his statue was just beheaded last week. And what was funny also, like to add to that, was that the city wants to like clean that statue. So for me again, it shows that South Africa is a long way to go before like, and Cape Town in particular, before realizing what's what really. But I think this is what the lockdown does, and it just gives you a lot of time to think and reflect and also learn if you can. I think there's a lot. I think if we weren't under lockdown, there would have been mass protests and mass statues being pulled down in the whole country, because the whole country is like full of settlers and colonialists and just like oppressors that are like portrayed in the most heroic ways, right? So like South Africa hasn't even started this process of taking down the statues. But I think that because of the lockdown and fear and paranoia, South Africa just didn't jump onto the bandwagon with the Black Lives Matter movement as much as a lot of other countries did. Like Tunisia did. Tunisia is still protesting Black Lives Matter right now, and this whole George Floyd thing. But I think for whatever reason, South Africa did not. But there is a lot of work in terms of the statues, and I agree. Like, it's not always just about removing it and then it solves, because it really doesn't solve the problem. Maybe even defacing it and leaving it defaced one on.